take advantage of that time to celebrate our educators and the amazing work they have done during this crisis. Thank you all for your strength and resilience during these difficult times. Together, we will come out of this crisis stronger. Governor.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. And now the Chairman of our State Board of Education, Eric Davis.
On behalf of my colleagues on the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction, we'd like to thank you, Governor Cooper, Secretary Cohen, and Superintendent Johnson for their outstanding leadership in this challenging time. We'd also extend our appreciation to the many legislators who have provided their support for our schools. It remains important for each of us to follow the guidance of the Governor's Office and experts from the CDC and our own Health and Human Services Department. In light of today's announcement, we are now more than ever resolute in our mission to forge ahead, close equity gaps, and advocate for every public school student in North Carolina to be empowered to accept academic challenges, prepared to pursue their chosen path after graduating from high school, and equipped to become lifelong learners. Now more than ever, we will guard and maintain the right of a sound basic education for every child in our North Carolina public schools. This public health crisis has necessitated innovation, and educators throughout North Carolina have, without hesitation, answered this call. It is with great admiration that we express appreciation to our district and school leaders for providing vision and direction, to our teachers for serving as education's first responders by maintaining critical connections and nurturing students' social and emotional well-being, and for the countless child nutrition, transportation, and support staff for ensuring that our most vulnerable students continue to receive nutritious meals. Never in our history have collaboration and teamwork been more important. A shining example of this are the many work groups composed of staff from DPI and representatives from associations across our state, including the teachers and school superintendents. These groups are responsible for producing recommendations and guidance as we address policy and legal issues that arise from this pandemic. Next week, our partners in the General Assembly return to Raleigh to begin their important work, and we stand ready to provide to our lawmakers fact-driven information and recommendations to inform their decisions in the best interest of our students. We're committed to strengthening these relationships. Today's executive order reinforces our 4 initial responses to this challenge: the health and safety of our students and staff, ensuring our most vulnerable children and their families have access to nutritious meals, maintaining teacher and student relationships which provide extraordinarily valuable social emotional support to our children, and keeping students engaged through remote learning. As Governor Cooper indicated, our schools will continue to play a critical role in response to this public health emergency. While school buildings will continue to be used strategically to address student needs, our school employees will support students and provide remote learning opportunities until the end of the scheduled for each district's respective 2019-2020 school year. Consistent with previous guidance, teachers and school employees are to continue to work, and they remain eligible to be paid. Hourly employees remain important members of our team for instructional purposes and to fulfill urgent emergency needs. Local leaders should continue to assign duties to our valuable classified staff members to maximize their contributions and to keep them working. We need their talents to continue our emergency efforts. Teachers remain working, and their efforts are vital for supporting our school children and their families. Districts should remain sensitive to all employees' particular health concerns, consistent with CDC and DHHS public health guidance. Remote work is a valuable option and one that we all encourage and that local schools should take full advantage of. In the next few weeks, we will pivot from our initial stage of response to a readiness stage, which will require resources to continue to feed our children, remain connected to our students, and to continue to provide training and support for educators as they rethink instructional design and delivery. Our readiness stage also includes a new opportunity for those students who will benefit most to an early start to school. We plan to invite this special group of students to gain a jump start on the next school year, reestablishing their relationships with teachers and their classmates as they continue their education. That program is focused at this point on the early grades and on literacy, and depending on funding, we hope to expand that opportunity to more grades and more students. All of this leads to our much-awaited reentry stage, when we will welcome our students back to our schools. Rest assured, as the governor mentioned, we will operate our schools differently in the next school year because the safety and security of your child and your child's teacher, in our eyes, demands nothing less. There'll be more to come as we work with our partners in developing these plans. For centuries, North Carolina has been home to 7 majestic lighthouses, symbols of our strength, hope for the weary, and beacons of safe harbor for those in rough waters. Like these mighty lighthouses, we will continue to stand our ground with an unwavering commitment to ensure that your child's school and every school endures the challenges before us and emerges from this pandemic stronger, more resilient, and more effective in educating your child and every child in our great state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have some more news to share today. I'm releasing a proposed budget for our state that directs $1.4 billion in federal money from the CARES Act, Coronavirus Relief Fund, to help our state. And this won't be the last request that we make. The budget package is intended to fund immediate needs in three main areas: public health and safety, continuity of operations for education and other state government services, and assistance to small business and local governments. I'm recommending a strong investment to respond to this unprecedented crisis. We know people are hurting, businesses are struggling, and governments are facing severe shortages because of this virus. That's why we have to act now to get resources distributed in a smart and efficient way. Now, those who've followed my past budget recommendations know that the proposal does not contain everything that I want. But I present it after consultation with General Assembly members in both parties and in the spirit of consensus and compromise. With me today is our State Budget Director, Charlie Perouse, who will walk through some of the details of our budget proposal. Director Perouse.
Governor, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. The governor's charge to my team a few weeks ago was very clear. He wanted a COVID-19 state budget response package that was responsive, responsible, and built upon compromise and consensus with all members of the General Assembly. And me and my team have been working day and night to do just that. Specifically, as the governor mentioned, this package totals $1.4 billion and covers 3 main areas: a little over $300 million for immediate public health and safety needs, $740 million to continue crucial education and state government services, and $375 million of direct assistance to small business and local governments statewide. Over the next two slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail in these recommendations. The first area, immediate public health and safety. There's a $20 million recommendation for enhanced capacity for public health, mental health, and crisis health services. This $20 million would be direct support to local health departments for all of these services, which may include infection control at adult care homes and prisons, and behavioral crisis services to divert cases from hospital emergency rooms. It also recommends an additional $40 million to cover additional Medicaid costs. This would cover testing and treatment for COVID-19 positive patients, as well as to provide targeted support for providers most at financial hardship and at risk of insolvency. The last recommendation on this page is $25 million to cover food, safety, shelter, and child care. This would provide additional funds to support food banks, homeless and domestic violence shelters, and child and protective services. Also in the immediate public health and safety bucket, and an area that you've been hearing a lot about for the last several weeks, is $75 million for personal protection equipment and testing, tracing, trends statewide. This would provide funding for gowns, masks, ventilators, and sanitation supplies statewide, as well as testing capacity and equipment needed for tracing and trends that Dr. Cohen has been talking to you a lot about over the last couple of weeks. Also provides $78 million for school nutrition. The state superintendent and board chair Davis mentioned this item to you. Top priority of the governor, $78 million to continue providing the 500,000 meal packets that are being provided to students across the state each day. This would cover costs for the preparation of meal as well as the transportation of meals to students throughout the state. And finally, in this area, there's a $75 million recommendation with targeted support for rural and underserved communities. This $75 million would support hardship grants to hospitals and other medical providers, would expand outreach and services to the African American community who has been especially hard hit by this pandemic. Now on to the continuity of operations for education and state government. $243 million is provided to the public school system to cover many of the things that you heard earlier, including enhancing remote teaching and learning and capabilities, and then to develop and implement summer bridge or jump start programs for students that are currently below grade level. In the higher education space, the governors recommend fully funding the needs in the UNC system, the community colleges, and the private colleges. In the UNC system, funds would be used to transition all classes and testing online through the summer and to begin sanitizing facilities before the reopening. And in the community college system, there's also support for enhanced online offerings and student tutoring to keep students academically on track. There's also $40 million provided for state agency and ports revenue losses. This money would buffer revenue losses at many state attractions, including the zoo, aquariums, and state fairgrounds, as well as state services that rely on receipts to operate, including the Department of Labor, Agriculture, and the Department of Justice. In state government operations, recommending $80 million. This would mainly cover the overtime costs in our mental health, adult care homes, and our prisons, as well as to provide critical IT equipment and software needs for our court system as we transition more services online. In this area would also include monies for the Department of Agriculture in case of processing plant outbreaks or closures. Also have a very important recommendation for the Department of Transportation. This $300 million in emergency funds would ensure that critical existing construction and maintenance projects statewide would continue without interruption. And finally, in our last bucket, small business and local government assistance. $75 million is appropriated for small business assistance through the Golden Leaf program. This provides bridge loans of up to $50,000 at zero interest and no payments for 6 months. As of currently, we've received over 3,000 applications from businesses across the state and 98 counties for these funds. And finally, the governor recommends $300 million in direct local government assistance that we would be provided to all 100 counties and 550 municipalities across the state based on their population. Governor?
Thank you, Director Perouse. I appreciate the work you and your staff are doing on this and for working quickly on a package that I hope we can all agree on. Lots of things in North Carolina are not the same as they were just 2 months ago, but we're the same people, strong and resilient, and we are doing right by protecting ourselves and our communities. By safeguarding core priorities like education and health, we'll be able to build our state back effectively. With me today is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Mandy Cohen, our Secretary of Public Safety, Eric Hooks, our Emergency Management Director, Mike Sprayberry. Of course, we have Superintendent Mark Johnson and School Board Chairman Eric Davis, along with Budget Director Charlie Perouse. All will be available for questions if you have them. Our sign language interpreters are Cameron Larson and Karen Magoon. And behind the scenes, as always, Jackie and Jasmine Mativier are our Spanish language interpreters. We'll now take questions from the media. I would like to remind you to state your name and the name of your organization before you ask your question. And we'll take the first question.
Ann Doss-Helms, WFAE.
Hi, thank you so much. I wonder what your best estimate is of the number of students who are not engaged in remote learning now, and what strategies you might have for reaching them as we move forward with more weeks of remote learning.
I know that each and every day, more and more students are participating in remote learning as we get them hot spots, as our school system gets more coordinated, and I know that they're going to continue to work very hard to expand it. And I'll call on either Superintendent Johnson or Chairman Davis.
Thank you, Governor. So in response to the question, bear in mind that we're reaching students through both digital and non-digital means. Every day, school buses are rolling across our state delivering instructional materials to students who do not have internet connectivity or do not have reliable internet connectivity, and then returning back to schools with the results of the previous day's lesson. So depending on how you count remote learning, the number may vary. What is clear based on a survey of our districts is that there's approximately 300,000 students that would benefit by having a Chromebook or other device to enable them to continue their studies. So there's multiple parts. There's the connectivity to the internet, there's having the device, and then there's having the skill to use the resources. But that's a fair estimate of the magnitude of the challenge we face in connecting our students in a reliable and consistent way to our teachers.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Ginger Livingston, The Daily Reflector.
Ginger, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me now, Governor?
Yes, I can.
Sorry about that, sir.
Okay.
After your announcement about extending the stay-at-home order to May 8th, there were elected leaders in eastern North Carolina that thought it was too overreaching and that maybe you could put in less restrictive initiatives in rural areas that don't seem to be as hard hit. What's your response to that, sir?
This virus does not respect county lines. Many people may live in one county, work in another county, shop in another county. And it is important that we have a floor of protection across our state for all of the people. And I think that we're going to continue to work to get to where we want to be on our indicators before we move into phase 1. And we're hoping we can do that sooner than later. I've been grateful for the input of our local government leaders, and many of them support what we are doing. There are some areas that want to do even more, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of these local government officials as we go through this very difficult process. Thanks. Next question, please.
Joe Bruno, WSOC.
Hey there, this is Joe Bruno from Channel 9. My question is for Dr. Cohen. We've obtained emails saying that NCDHHS has received a donation of hydroxychloroquine for long-term care facilities with outbreaks. Given the new FDA guidance released today, are you still recommending this as an option for COVID-19 treatment?
Thanks for that question. So yes, new information has been coming out all the time about different medications. What we are learning and what we did very early on was say that we need to make sure that those medicines are available for the folks who had need for them before COVID-19. So those with some of our inflammatory diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis use those medicines to treat their chronic diseases. And we very early worked with our medical board and the pharmacy board. They were some of the first in the nation to say, hey, we want to make sure we're limiting that prescribing to folks who had those conditions before this started. So thanks to them for that quick work. We were given a donation, which we accepted and we have held on to as we have been learning more about this research, and we'll continue to look at that research as we go along to see if there is an appropriate use. But you are right, the recent research that came out this week from the NIH says that there is not an appropriate setting yet that the research shows to use that kind of medication. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Jonah Kaplan, ABC 11.
Good afternoon, Governor. Jonah Kaplan here with ABC 11. This question is for you as well to Dr. Cohen. I wanted to inquire about the pressure you're getting when you look at some of the neighboring states, South Carolina, Georgia, and are you concerned about North Carolinians who may want to go down south, maybe to shop at retail, watch a movie now that they can? What is your advice to those North Carolinians who may be impatient with the process here and then want to go take a drive somewhere down south?
Thank you, Jonah. We are concerned about states that border North Carolina and their decisions regarding this pandemic. We're particularly concerned about the state of Georgia that has begun lifting most all of its restrictions, and we really won't know the effect of that until a little more than 2 or 3 weeks afterward, because you would expect that the spread of the virus with opening up the state to most all of the businesses would happen more rapidly. And we're concerned not only about North Carolinians who would travel there, but we're concerned about people who would travel from those states to North Carolina. And in fact, I was talking to some people in western North Carolina about this, and they're concerned that people coming up from the northern part of Georgia and from Atlanta could particularly have a better chance of bringing the virus because these restrictions have been limited. Or have been lifted. I have expressed my concern and am scheduled to talk to Governor Kemp a little later today about those concerns. And we would hope that they would take a second look at this because we are concerned about these restrictions being lifted and potentially hurting North Carolina because the virus, like it doesn't respect county lines, it doesn't respect state lines either. And Dr. Cohen, if you'd like to add to that, she says I did a good job on that one, so good. Next question, please.
Katie Peralta, Charlotte Agenda.
Hi,
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I had a quick question for you, Governor Cooper, about some of the restrictions in the later phases of the reopening that were mentioned yesterday. I was hoping that you guys could elaborate a bit on loosening some of the restrictions around mass gatherings in later phases. In other words, when will people be allowed to gather in groups larger than 10, 20, 30 for events like concerts and weddings and funerals and things like that?
We are concerned about mass gatherings, as is the White House Coronavirus Task Force, in that the federal recommendations and the North Carolina guidelines now recommend that no more than 10 people gather together. The reason for that is that when people are gathered together and close together, there is a much better chance of the virus spreading among people in a mass gathering. If we meet our indicators and go into phase one, we'll have some loosening of the stay-at-home order and parks being able to open. But in phase one, we still will have the same limitation of 10 people on mass gatherings. After 2 to 3 weeks after phase one, and if our indicators continue to look positive, because we're going to keep looking at the science data and facts, then in phase two, we will increase that number of mass gatherings. And that number will be put together by health experts in talking with the CDC. And we want to talk with our own coronavirus task force that includes people in the business community, the nonprofit arena, law enforcement, and make decisions regarding the pushing up on the number of in a mass gathering. And then in phase three, you would see yet an additional increase in the mass gatherings. So it's something that it's going to be like a dimmer switch. We're not going to flip the light on when we meet the first set of indicators. We're going to be slowly pushing it up, hoping that we continue to flatten the curve and do well like North Carolinians have done until we can get into what our new normal will be. We know that this virus will be with us until we have a vaccine. So we're hoping that we can get back to as much normal as we can in our lives while still protecting ourselves from the virus and still making sure we push this economy forward. Thank you. Next question, please.
Jonathan Alexander, News and Observer.
Hi, Governor Cooper. My name is Jonathan Alexander with the News and Observer. What specific conditions would need to be met for schools to reopen next year? And also, what about year-round schools that are supposed to open in July?
So what we've announced today is that for the regular academic year 2019-2020, that we're going to continue the remote learning without regular classrooms physically going on. Decisions will be made about year-round summer schools, summer camps, as we move forward and see where we are in this pandemic. Already, plans are being made about how we safely reopen schools in the next school year, thinking about spacing, thinking about common areas, thinking about hygiene. And one of the reasons why we're trying to make sure the schools have sufficient funding, we know that this will cost more. So those decisions are going to be made looking at the science, data, and facts, and as we go further, seeing how much we can do and how we ought to do it, with the public health and safety of our students being number one. Anybody want to add to that, you guys? Okay. Thank you. Next question.
Gary Robertson, Associated Press.
Hi, Governor. It's Gary Robertson with AP. You rolled out your $1.4 billion request today, and you said it was being released in a spirit of compromise and consensus, I think is your words. I mean, how detailed have you presented your plan to legislative leaders, and do you really sense that this will be not flippantly, kind of a kumbaya week with legislative leaders to get something done?
Legislative leaders on both sides of the aisle have seen this in detail. Would you say that, Charlie? They've seen it all, and a lot of it is represented from legislators who have given us input on what ought to go in the package. From what I understand, the House budget that they are looking at may be a little more than what we're talking about. The Senate budget may be a little less. I think we all want to go in the same direction, and we're hoping that this provides a good compromise, recognizing that it may not be the exact same product at the end of the day when all legislators have input with this. But I may let Charlie say a word or two, because he and his staff have been working closely with the legislators and their staff during House committee meetings and over teleconference calls. But Charlie, you want to say a word or two about that?
Governor, thank you. Gary, I just add to that, we have been pretty much in daily contact with legislators of both parties and legislative staff about this package and working together for at least the last 3 weeks.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Ken Smith, WRAL.
Good afternoon, Governor. Ken Smith with WRAL. A couple of questions. One, what about private and parochial schools? What are your hope for them? And what's your message to parents today, some of whom are probably really disappointed that students will not be going back to school, particularly when you think of graduation and all those issues that come along with the end of school year?
Private and parochial schools will be making their own decisions about how they teach children. I know that most all of them are working very hard to make sure that there is proper social distancing and hygiene, and we hope that they are following guidelines that have been provided by our Department of Health and Human Services. And I know that this is so difficult for parents and for students, particularly for seniors who are about to graduate. Their lives have been turned upside down. Parents who are having to stay at home with their children, who are working and then have to come home and to deal with the situation at home, it has to be tough. Particularly parents who have become homeschool teachers and trying to help their children with their work that they're trying to get remotely. What I would say to them is that this decision is not made lightly. This decision is made with the high hopes that we could go in and finish the school year like any regular school year. But this virus tells us that that cannot be. And I know that parents want us to keep the health and safety of their children as the number one priority. And after consultation with health experts, that's where we landed. We want to continue to emphasize that the learning doesn't stop, that we want to do everything that we can to try to help these students through the end of this school year and into the next school year. But this is a decision based on health and public safety, and it is pretty much consistent with what most other states have done across the country. Thank you. Next question.
Garrett Bergquist, Spectrum News.
Good afternoon, Governor. Garrett Bergquist with Spectrum News. Looking ahead to the next school year, I mean, we're still looking at a pretty long timeline for a vaccine, a potential second wave of this thing later this year. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the ideas that are in the works for trying to protect students when they go back in? For example, why might we be seeing more remote learning even after students are physically back in the building, temporary classrooms, spread people out, that sort of thing?
Thanks for that question. You're exactly right. The decisions are going to be made because we're going to continue to be subject to this virus through the summer and likely into the fall. And that's something that we know will likely be there. So there's been a lot of hard work and planning going into how we provide hygiene and cleaning, how we space students with social distancing, how we may stagger things, how we may not, depending on how things are and what our indicators look like. We may not be doing sports or common areas. It depends on what our data shows us and what our health experts say. So the idea is to try to create a safe environment using all of the tools that we're putting together between now and then. And I'm going to talk to let Dr. Cohen give you a couple of things that I know they're working closely with the State Board and with the Department of Public Instruction about what our new schools in the new normal would look like.
Thank you, Governor. And of course, we're working closely with those educators around the state. They know their schools and their communities best, but we're going to work collaboratively to try to find ways in which we can protect students, but also we need to think about our teachers. One of the hardest things to think about are some of our teachers who might have chronic conditions or are over 65, and how do we best protect them, as well as we know we have medically frail children as well. So we're thinking about a number of ways, so not just altering social distancing and hand hygiene, but we have to think about the range of student body as well as our teachers and other staff that we'll need to protect as we go forward. I think we definitely want to beef up the amount of nursing support that is in every school to be able to identify students who might be falling ill, and thinking about strategies to deploy testing and tracing just like we would in any type of situation. So those are the plans that we'll build over the next number of weeks in collaboration with the Department of Public Instruction, the Board of Education, and of course our many superintendents and school leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
This will be our final question. Rick Curl, the Daily Record.
Yes, hello, Governor. It's Rick Curl with the Daily Record. Done. In Harnett County, and this may be more for Dr. Cohen, I'm not positive, but in Harnett County, we had an outbreak at a nursing home there, and on the report this morning, some of the numbers didn't quite match with what's been told to us. There was a report that there were 50 cases in the one nursing home in Harnett County, and then this morning the nursing home was not even listed, not even showing as Harnett County having an outbreak. Can you offer some insight into that, Dr. Cohen or Governor, either one of you?
We'll say that outbreaks in our nursing homes are our top priority, not only to try to prevent them, but to deal with them once they happen. But Dr. Cohen?
Sure. Thank you for that. I'd have to go back to our team, and so we'll follow up with you directly on Harnett County and any of the outbreak situation. And we are continuing to work to make sure that we can release more and more information. So stay tuned for that. And thank you, and we'll follow up.
I want to say a big thank you to all of our educators out there, teacher assistants, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, people who are continuing to work hard every single day to make sure that our children can get the best education that they can get during these very difficult times. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks so much.